Sound and data.
So here we are with Marco Buongiorno Nardelli, and part of the sound and data channel. We were lucky enough to find Marco because he is a physicist by trade. That's his employed at the University of North Texas in Denton in the physics department. Why don't you explain your position here, and then we'll explain why the rare and wonderful thing about it.
Okay, I'm a physicist and a computational material scientist. That means that I study materials property using computational tools and theoretical tools, of course. And our main research effort is in the development of materials databases, materials property databases for material discovery and development. That means we calculate properties for millions of different materials, and then from the data we can look for specific materials in the database that fit specific properties for specific applications.
So for potential replacement of lithium and lithium-ion batteries.
For potential replacement of materials, for finding better materials for electronics, the next generation of iPhones and so on.
But then the really little twist on the story is that he, like many of us, was a musician first before the other thing cuts in. So before I was a recording engineer, I was doing a lot of things, and so. He is a composer, a trained composer. You studied in the conservatory in Rome?
Well, actually, I never studied formally. I have only one degree in music. That is in music theory. But I never studied formally in any conservatory. I studied with different composers
that used to be the model.
Exactly.
Well, me too. I would say mostly mentors.
Yeah.
I did go to a lot of different music schools, but anyway. And I went to the IARTA. David Stout, who's here at UNT as well, had this get together. And here's this guy showing his material science background, and suddenly he's doing this MIDI playback of the very sophisticated quantum mechanical renderings of crystal structures and diamonds and gold, and just it's very interesting. And I said, well, I have to, and I'm like going, phone me, in the room. And I have to talk to you during the lectures. And we talk and have become friends, I think, at this point.
Yes.
And we're both in the same area here. And we've been trying, since we are in the same area, usually I do these as Skype calls and then reach the person, and we have a very strict time. And I can be, we have to do the podcast. So finally we're getting to the podcast for the Sound and Data channel. So the real thing is, why don't you give a brief explanation of your approach, sort of the mechanical approaches?
Yeah. So the idea that was kind of going around in my mind, looking at all this data that we generate, was can I do something with this data so that I can make them more visible for. My first idea was for the general public. So these are things that material scientists know, but if I ask somebody about it, nobody knows what these materials database are, why they are there for. Although, this was a big effort from federal agencies a few years ago. There was a lot of money invested in this, but it didn't really trickle down to the public. And one way, of course, is using sonification and art in general and music to make this something that people can feel about it. We've been, it's very typical that you have the music of the spheres, the music of the universe, because all representation of sound and things for.
But that's more interpretation, and yours is more directly driven by the data, right?
Mine is very much driven by the data. In fact, the final product of this is what I call the computer-aided data-driven composition environment that takes the data from these databases and on one hand produces a sonification that can be used as a tool to explore the database in a way, what we call the data mining, using sound as a driver. And then on the other side, we can take this data and remix them and make music out of it.
Okay, well, we'll talk about the remix, but let's talk about the data driver thing. And what what was interesting, and the thing that you brought forward, which I've also looked into, but I had not talked to the guy who was originally on the Dylan project and became Pandora. They have these musical identifiers that they do. You put on Amy Winehouse and you get a bunch of female singers that are in that style. But this same technology, and there's also a project at MIT called Tool, I think, that does the same thing, which we could talk about offline. But the bottom line is that you could create these spectral sounds of the, I guess you were saying, the eigenvalues of
whatever quantum mechanical data that we get out of the simulations that are used, that are actual properties. So they mean something scientific.
And you used at first Super Collider and then later some other stuff to make these sounds that are actually almost static sounds of these. At least
this is what I call the data sound identifier.
Right. That's what I was getting to.
That means one of the things that I want to do on the science side of this project is to develop. I already developed it. This concept of data sound identifier, that it's a sound that is unique for each entry of the database.
And we should say this database has millions of entries.
Millions of entries.
Yeah, and so this is something that the sound might be an easier way to find the detail of similarities.
Or use it as in this algorithm for finding sounds that are similar.
Right.
Because what we are looking is really similarities that can be then used to associate materials that in principle would be opposite side of the spectrum, but they have the same properties by chance.
Some other place on the periodic table.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the scientific motivation for this.
Yeah, and this is a really strong argument for the use of sound in data with outside of all the artistic ramifications. But to be honest, the most interesting thing to me is that you're actually a composer, and so you're on this very interesting threshold of the moment when you decide that you're going to compose instead of do a raw spectral blast of what gold spectrum is, the eigenvalues of the matrix, blah, blah, blah.
Well, by the way, some of this you can hear in my website.
Yes, we're going to put, there'll be a text associated with this on Creative Disturbance on the Sound and Data channel, but why don't you just say it
I mean, basically there is, the website is www.materialsoundmusic with 2 S's.com. And there is one of the pages that says materials. You click on there, and there are this data sound identifier for silicon, diamond, tin, and germanium.
Yeah.
And you can hear actually that these are very similar materials from the point of view of the material science in a way. The structure, the data that we use for the sonification are very similar, but you can distinguish them very clearly.
You can. And can your colleagues, I mean, the postdocs in the other room here, if you played that for them, they go, oh, I hear the high frequencies of tin compared to. So that's interesting. So I mean, one of the things that we've been talking about is the richness that sound brings to the detail of something, which is a different kind of richness than the visual does. There's the long-term orientation that we have to graphs. Going back to Descartes, we're used to plotting things. We're not used to hearing things as a representation, I guess a mapping of data values. And so this is a really interesting area that shows that there's a richness. And I've run into this in our own work at UTD, where there's a kind of richness that you get, even though you have a visualization. There's something a little bit different and maybe even deeper about the way the sound of the same set of data presents itself.
I completely agree.
Yeah, but there's also a training problem and a disorientation.
There's a training problem. There are many different things.
Everything sounds like a horror show to somebody who's uninitiated. Okay, but let's get to the musical part. You make these decisions, and you said something very interesting in your talk today where you said the moment of composition happens at the first decision. I think something like that. It's like as soon as you make a commitment, okay, I'm going to turn this to MIDI
in a different, using a particular algorithm.
That's
already a decision that you are taking.
Yeah, and you're hearing, and then your influence as a composer cuts in.
Yes.
Right? Because you hear, oh, this sounds a little bit like something.
Yes.
Like, can move this way. I can stretch it up.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right. This is an interesting problem in sonification in general that I don't think you have with visualization, because visualization, we know it's a chart. But when you do a sonification, no one they don't know it's not music, right? That, in other words,
Yeah.
you're not going to confuse a chart with a piece of art in a lot of cases.
Well, in a lot of cases,
yeah.
yes. Well, my point there is that a lot has to do with internal consistency. That means if you choose a path to sonification for a set of data, then you have to use the same path for all the data in the set.
Exactly. So it's
And,
replicable. So the
it's
engine.
replicable. Engineering-wise, you have the same structure that you can. I mean, an algorithm could recognize the structure that you're looking for, even if your mapping is done in a different way. But if your mapping is done in a different way within the same set, then there is no
Consistency.
no, it's not
Yeah.
consistent. You cannot say, "Oh, this one has what I'm looking for. This one has not," because your mapping of the two
Something
things
different.
is wrong. I mean, it's different.
And this map could even be very sophisticated.
It can be very sophisticated.
Yeah,
I
as
mean,
long as
right
it's
now,
consistent.
my mapping is really on the keys of a piano.
Right.
But well, I have some examples done with Super Collider where I use the direct mapping of frequency into values of
Yeah.
data into frequencies. That
Yeah,
means
I've done-
microtonal and all the rest.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
But still, it has the same kind of idea in the.
So
the
this is
mapping.
consistent with Thomas Hermann's sonification definition, which caused a little bit of reaction. I even reacted to it in one paper where there had to be consistent. I understand what he was saying. Exactly what you're saying. There has to be consistent representation that you can return the same data set and get the same sound from the same material.
Yeah, but it
But
doesn't mean that your choice cannot change at the very beginning.
Right, and it also doesn't mean that you can't. My argument was that the thing that's missing from that is the mention of craft and compositional decisions that make it more I wouldn't, palatable is the wrong word, but more structured in a way that enhances the understanding of the data. I would compare it, if we were using visualization, to the choice of color, right, in a graph. Right?
Yeah.
You could use complementary colors or just the way you decide to color. And the same thing is true in the craft of sonification. But it introduces a complication of composition, wouldn't you say?
Yes, but I think that the act of composing starts with you choosing the encoding.
Right.
But then there are so many other layers that you add that actually completely change your data and make it a piece of art rather than a piece of engineering.
Okay, so where is that threshold? This is the most interesting question to me. There is a threshold there where you suddenly go, oh, well, I'm never going to play this for my physicist computational buddies and expect them to get information about whatever the material is, and this is a work of art. That's a conscious moment, isn't it?
That's a conscious moment. One of the things that I showed in the talk, and I can add to the website that is not there yet, but I have an example where I'm just doing a straight sonification of the data out of my basic algorithm, the one that actually does is the mapping.
Yeah.
And I map to different scales.
Right. You play
Without
that.
doing any other manipulation than the choice of the scale and the algorithm that transforms the data into MIDI events.
And I heard that, and I'll testify that the one, and you made this comment, which I think was correct, that if with a Xian playing with the pentatonic one, you suddenly had Chinese music. I mean,
Exactly.
where the other one sounded much more like maybe some post-Bartok.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it changes, but it still gives you the same information.
It does, yeah.
The point is that from there, it's like having to work with a bunch of scales and being, a jazz improviser. You have scales, you have patterns, you have, whatever, your scale books that you are practicing every day, and you use this in a composition that is your improvisation on the piece.
Yeah.
And here, I do exactly the same thing. In a way, I apply operations to the data as I
Right.
would on a set of pitch or
in the classic 12-tone sense.
12-tone sense.
Yeah.
And I change this all over the place.
Yeah.
And you can hear the difference always on the website. There is the first composition that I made using this techniques that is called Music for 88 Keys that we recorded together with Scott actually at University of Texas Dallas. That was a great recording session where that is a composition. It's not It's not a sonification anymore.
Well, you've broken this consistency.
You break the consistency. You use different things. You manipulate your data in different ways. And I have also another composition that is not recorded yet, a series of pieces actually that I'm working on, where this manipulation is done live during the performance rather than pre-composed, as in this particular case that I'm talking about.
Well, clearly this is chapter 1 of our conversations with Marco regarding these incredible topic as we go forward with our research. But we're trying to keep these down to about 20 minutes, so I think
perfect.
So
Thank you for doing this.
Oh yeah, well more later. I think fantastic, and I really appreciate you taking your time.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Sound and data.